Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody. Good evening to this meeting that the business group of the Honourable Company has organised tonight, and particular thank you to David Owen for joining us again, because some of us will remember we had an excellent meeting last November at the University of Gloucestershire Business School, where David spoke to us about what was then a late draft of the local industrial strategy. And we had a very good discussion at that time. We thought it would be very relevant to see if we should revisit that, or if we could revisit that with David in the light of everything that's happened since last November. We're in a very, very different world now. And the question is, should our strategies and priorities change to meet the new demands, or are they reinforced by what has happened? Whatever, I don't think you should ever waste a good crisis. So I think we do need to explore our local industrial strategy. David said he's very happy to have a discussion and to take feedback, and would welcome feedback after his presentation. So David, if I could pass over to you and ask you to talk to us before that very discussion. Thanks very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all very much for joining in this evening. I think I've been asked to talk about three things effectively. One is to talk about the local industrial strategy, and for those of you that weren't at the November session, which seems more than a November away now, to give the highlights from the local industrial strategy. Second, then, to talk about the economic impact on Gloucestershire and what we're predicting to be the economic impact on Gloucestershire of the current crisis. And then thirdly, to talk about recovery planning and our approach as GFirst to recovery for Gloucestershire's economy. I'm also conscious there's at least two of my board members listening into this, so I'm sure they'll correct me or harangue me if I get things wrong as I go through. And also to say on the recovery planning, the board of the LEP will be looking at that on the 14th of this month. So when I talk about recovery planning in the third section of my presentation, it'll be subject to board approval and further discussion from the board. So the local industrial strategy, for those of you who aren't aware, each local enterprise partnership area in England's been asked to put together a local industrial strategy some time ago now, and ours was drafted in 2019 and got to final phase of almost being ready to go, and then COVID hit as a crisis. So what the local industrial strategy does is it identifies a number of both challenges and opportunities for Gloucestershire. So our biggest challenge by far is our demographic challenge. We have an ageing population and we lose young people in Gloucestershire. So we have to address that challenge if we're going to continue to have a vibrant and buoyant economy. I'm not suggesting we get rid of our ageing population, but I am suggesting that what we need to do is attract far more younger people into Gloucestershire to come and live, work and play here as well. It talks about our strategy as a county and how we fit into the wider context. So we've been really pleased to be very active members of the Western Gateway, which is a powerhouse alongside the Northern Powerhouse and Midlands Engine. Western Gateway covers Swansea, Cardiff, Newport, Bristol, West of England, Swindon, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire. And emerged in the summer of 2019, and there's a huge amount of work been going on since then to identify what the priorities are for a Western Gateway area, and indeed for us what the benefits are of being part of a larger geography, which gives us a much louder voice with government. One of our big strengths in Gloucestershire is innovation. So around 70% of our businesses in this county are innovation active. That's as compared to 55% nationally. And you only have to think to some of the great things that have come out of Gloucestershire to see where that comes from and where that spirit of innovation comes from. So Frank Whittle and the jet engine, or Edwin Budding and the lawnmower, or of course very relevant right now, Edward Jenner and mass immunisation, and various other people throughout the last 150 years who've been incredibly innovative, and that bears out in the data on how many of our businesses are innovation active right now. We've got four key strengths in terms of sectors: our manufacturing, our aerospace, our agri-tech and our cyber-tech sectors are extremely strong. That's not to say other sectors aren't important, but those 4 very strong sectors with growth potential in some cases, and with large amounts of value and employment in other cases. But we've got a long history of a skills mismatch between the needs of our economy and businesses and the provision that's going on in the county, and we need to start addressing that. And of course, no economic strategy would be worth any salt whatsoever without thinking about climate change and the climate challenge, and what we might need to do and indeed want to do at a local level to address issues of climate. In the last 3 months, government have reviewed all of the local industrial strategy evidence bases. Those of you that were at the session in November will remember ours has something like 200 pieces of evidence that fed into the strategy development, the biggest economic evidence base we've ever had in the county, and government have found that those are still sound, they're still relevant, albeit with some changes because of the current crisis that we're in. So the focus of local industrial strategy for us is around cyber tech and maximising every opportunity we can out of having GCHQ placed within the heart of the county, and ensuring that we can grow a very vibrant cyber tech industry, as well as digitise all of our sectors in Gloucestershire and all of our businesses. And secondly, about a green economy and making sure that Gloucestershire can become and does become the greenest place in the country to live and work. Our ambitions then are set into 5 areas which are governed by government. So ideas, we want to be an innovation factory for the UK. We also want to have a real focus around agri-tech development. We think there are opportunities in that because of some of the assets we have in Gloucestershire. Around business environment, we already have one of the 2 best growth hub services in the country. We want to continue to make sure that our growth hub service can deliver for businesses in Gloucestershire and assist them to grow and reach their ambitions. On infrastructure, we want mass transit solutions to join up the urban heart of the county that eases the pressure then on the rural hinterlands. We want to see real modal shift away from the individual in the motor car towards more people using public transport and more people using active travel to get around the county. And of course, in terms of infrastructure, we need to build more homes, but more importantly, we need to build the right kind of homes that attract that younger generation into the county. On place, we think there's a real opportunity around tourism, and I'll come on in a second to talk about the real challenges there are for the tourism and hospitality sector, not just in Gloucestershire, but nationally and internationally because of the crisis. But we think there is a real opportunity around tourism, and for tourism to be a really important part of Gloucestershire's economy moving forward. We think there is a huge opportunity around a city region centred on Cheltenham and Gloucester and developments of the cyber park beyond that. We think that it should be a really big opportunity for the county and something we need to maximise on, and that will attract that new generation of talent into the county. And we'd also like to see more of an emphasis on changing and adapting our cultural offer. So we are big supporters in the local industrial strategy of Gloucester bidding to be the City of Culture for 2025. There was one meeting of the City Council, I think, took place yesterday, where there was perhaps less enthusiasm, but we think that's a really important step forward in defining Gloucestershire as a different place to perhaps the perception that people outside of the county have. And then finally, on people in the local industrial strategy, clearly we need to attract more young talent. Personally, for me, this isn't necessarily about making sure that everybody at the age of 18 stays in Gloucestershire and doesn't leave here. It's actually about how do we attract more people who are 18 plus into Gloucestershire. How does this become a destination that if you're in your early to mid 20s, you want to come and build a successful career? We also talked, which seems to be very good hindsight on our part, very good preparation on our part, about flexibility and the need for a much more flexible approach to working. We see the change in demands that younger people have towards flexibility in their careers and jobs. We want Gloucestershire to be the most flexible place to work. And we need to get much better, as I said earlier, at that match between skills provision and the needs of businesses and the economy. And the Western Gateway Initiative gives us further opportunity to do that because it brings in players certainly in further and higher education, that are delivering different kinds of programmes to those that are currently being delivered in the county. So if I move on to look at some of the economic impacts of the last 3 or 4 months now in terms of the COVID crisis, obviously we've all seen the national headlines about the impact that it's had on the economy. And of course, we can't remove ourselves from the tragedy of the 40,000+ people who have died and the families and loved ones who've been affected by that. But the second element of what's happened with COVID is the huge impact it's had on the economy and the huge impact that that has on everyday lives for millions of people all over the UK and tens and hundreds of thousands of people in Gloucestershire. There are some positives. So traffic volumes at the moment are still at around 2/3 of the rate that they were pre-lockdown. They dropped down to about 1/3 or just under 1/3 of the rate they were pre-lockdown. And if you're travelling around the county, you'll start to see more of a build-up of traffic, but that has plateaued in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So it's still at that 2/3 level. When it comes to jobs, unemployment was at a pretty steady state in Gloucestershire for the last 18 months, at around about 1.9% of the working population claiming universal credit. That jumped in May to 3.7%, and it jumped again in June to 4.9%. So we now have around about 18,500 people who are claiming universal credit because they've either had a reduction in income from employment or they are unemployed. To put that into context, in 2009 we hit our worst month. I think it was April of 2009 in the last recession, and unemployment then was at 3.6%. So you can see we're already at 4.9%. And obviously that doesn't take into account the fact that we have 76,500 people in Gloucestershire currently benefiting from the furlough scheme from government. So around about 20% of the workforce are currently being paid 80% of their salary by government. The economic prediction work that we've done through a business called Hardesty Jones, who we've worked with before, and they came up with 3 scenarios for us. We bounce back really quickly and there's a cure or immunisation found for COVID very quickly, to this goes on for some time and we have a very slow bounce back and a scenario in the middle as well. The impact of those scenarios on the value of our economy would see a fall of somewhere to around about 2.9 billion to 3.7 billion in Q2 of 2020. And that's in the context of a normal quarter being about 4.1 billion of value. So you can see it's knocking off somewhere between around about 10% of value to just over 1/3 of value of the economy in Q2. And when it comes to employment, the worst case prediction is that we'll lose around about 49,000 jobs in Gloucestershire. So that would take us to about 85% of the pre-COVID employment levels in the county and see unemployment go up to somewhere between 15 and 20%, which obviously would be devastating for those individuals and their families. And we're predicting the recovery will come somewhere between 2022 and 2023. We should be back to a pre-COVID rate of employment and also value in the economy. Now, there are some opportunities that have come through COVID as well, and there's been lots of talk probably up until about a month ago around the environmental benefits of being in lockdown and less travel and less consumption. That seems to have gone more quiet in the last 3 or 4 weeks. That may just be me, but it does seem to have been less emphasis on that. I don't think we should lose the fact that we've all been celebrating the fact that you can hear birds in the morning better than you could 4 months ago, that there's less pollution, that there's less traffic on the roads, and that we're actually all enjoying the outdoors more. There's been also a lot of discussion about work-life balance and the positives of work-life balance, and how people are enjoying life working at home, or perhaps not in some cases. I said in a session last week that I think we have to be really careful on things like work-life balance and working at home, that we're not talking about this from a middle-class perspective where someone like myself does a job where I can do most of my job sat at home, and I have quite a nice home and a nice garden. But if you're living in other parts of Gloucestershire, that option may not just not be there for you, or may not be quite as pleasant. But also, of course, in lots of jobs, there isn't the option to work at home. But there certainly is something about us thinking much more about mental health and well-being and good work-life balance. And of course, the technology adoption that we've had in the last 4 months has been at a scale that we've never seen before. One of our board members said at a board meeting a couple of months ago that within 2 months we adopted technology that may well have taken us 2 or 3 years to adopt. So the fact that we're on a Zoom call this evening doing this session, the fact that we're doing much more remotely, we're signing off and approving expenditure and other things remotely, is something that we probably wouldn't have done. And there is that need to use the opportunity of a crisis to make some of those more fundamental changes. So when it comes to recovery, our recovery plan, as I said a little earlier, will be going to our board meeting on the 14th of July. The focus of our recovery plan is around Think Gloucestershire, and Think Gloucestershire in 5 core areas of work that relate back to the local industrial strategy. So Think Gloucestershire in terms of business. So how can we make sure that our Growth Hub support is still relevant and can assist businesses to make sure they can be as successful as possible within COVID-related conditions and constraints? How can our Growth Hub service support more startup businesses? We know that you get an upsurge in startup businesses when you get an increase in unemployment. So how can we make sure that people have got the very best opportunity to make sure that those startups are supported and survive? How can we support businesses to adopt more remote working techniques that work efficiently for them, even in a post-COVID environment? So the work from anywhere concept that we're promoting through Think Gloucestershire. And also, where are we on inward investment and attracting investment from overseas? That market, as you might imagine, has died in the last few weeks. So we need to make sure that we can resurrect that, and that Gloucestershire can be seen as somewhere to invest no matter where you are in the world. And certainly, of course, with the South Korea links that I know Patrick Brooke has been leading on for Honourable Company. On Think Gloucestershire around people, it chimes with much of what the Chancellor has announced today. So how do we make sure that we've got a robust apprenticeship programme in place for Gloucestershire? And how do we make sure that young people are seeing apprenticeships, and not just young people, people who are moving careers, see apprenticeships as a real opportunity for them? What opportunities are there to use our adult education service and budgets to make sure that we are retraining people and assisting people to move from one particular sector to another? Are there opportunities to get our now 3 universities working together to promote Gloucestershire from a marketing perspective as a place to attract young people to come to higher education here? What can we do in terms of shifting people from one business to another? So we're talking about an engineering and manufacturing capability index, so that those businesses that are sadly losing people, opportunities for those individuals can be presented to them in a robust and quick way, so they can get back into employment as quickly as possible. And what can our anchor institutions do to support the Gloucestershire economy? So particularly those larger public sector bodies, what can they do around local procurement? What can they do around health and well-being for both their employees and general employees in Gloucestershire? On Think Gloucestershire Place, we're a big supporter, as I said earlier, of the City of Culture bid for Gloucester for 2025. We'd like to see that continue as an aspiration. I think now is the time to have big ambitions and aspirations for our place, and certainly there are massive opportunities in Gloucester on behalf of the whole county becoming City of Culture, and the attraction that brings. We'll be promoting Shop Local, so we've heard lots about how people have been buying more goods and services locally during lockdown, and certainly for the last 3 or 4 months. We want to make sure that trend continues. Again, recognising that that's not an option for everybody, that for lots of people in this county, the pile it high, sell it cheap supermarket approach to food shopping in particular is what they can afford. And so we need to be very careful that we're not we're not excluding people from having quality goods and services. We'll also be working with our tourism partners to promote staycations. So we want to encourage more people that live in Gloucestershire to see some of the great assets that we have in the county. We launched a campaign just last week to highlight some of those assets, to encourage people, if they're not thinking of travelling abroad right now, that rather than travelling somewhere else in the UK, that there are really great entertaining and diverse opportunities for staycations in Gloucestershire. And then finally on place, we are working with partners to look at the food supply chain and how we might be able to be much more effective at providing more of our food requirements locally, as opposed to pulling it in either nationally or internationally. When it comes to Think Gloucestershire ideas, clearly we need to do a huge amount of work on digital business infrastructure. So getting businesses ready to digitise how they operate. We've seen a huge amount of progress in the last 4 months. We need to make sure we don't lose that progress, and that businesses can continue to look at virtual ways of operating so that they're more resilient should another COVID or similar event happen in the future. We are promoting innovation mentoring, so to take some of that innovation spirit we have in Gloucestershire and to make sure that can translate into as many businesses as possible. And of course, a real focus for us on cybertech and how we grow cybertech businesses in Gloucestershire through Cyber Central in West Cheltenham, but also other initiatives across the county. And then finally, in terms of recovery on Think Gloucestershire infrastructure, broadband infrastructure will be all important. I've lost count of the number of Zoom calls I've been on where I've said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to turn the video off because my broadband is playing up. We need to make sure that we're at the front of the queue in getting upgrades in broadband infrastructure right across the county. We need to embrace the planning changes that government are currently promoting to make sure that some of the barriers created by planning are taken away in a sensible manner, which allows investment and development to happen across Gloucestershire. And we need to be really clear that our drive should be around green energy and green infrastructure, and ensuring that we get that modal shift in how people move around the county, but also where they source their energy from. And so I'll leave you just to remind you some of those really quite worrying headlines in terms of the data. Yeah, unemployment jumped from 1.9% to 4.9%. 18,500 people currently claiming universal credit in Gloucestershire. That's way above where we were in 2009. And of course, the context is still 76,500 people being paid by government under the furlough scheme. And that reduction in the value of our economy from what would have been around about 4.2 billion pounds in the second quarter of 2020, down to somewhere between 3.7 and 2.9 billion pounds. So a huge reduction in the value of our economy as well. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much indeed. That was a tour de force and a valuable adjunct to what you talked about last November. People listening to this, please send in your questions. If you use the chat facility on Zoom, you can type in your question, and by the wonders of Zoom and the internet and broadband, hopefully, it will make it to me via Phil Robson. Lots to talk about there, David. You talked quite repeatedly, I think, about the importance of connectivity, working from home, digitalization, digital economy. The comments I've had post the November meeting and also around this meeting have been about putting even more emphasis in the local industrial strategy on that key issue of digitalization and of connectivity. I mean, you say making sure we're at the front of the queue. Could you elaborate on that a bit? I mean, how it's vital to us that we get to the front of the queue.
Yeah, so I think there are two elements to this, and they're two very different, and at times they're conflated and confused with each other. I think one is around the infrastructure that needs to be in place, and we all know that there are other economies in the world who've invested far more in their digital infrastructure, so their broadband capability, for example, than we have in the UK, and we need to catch up, and we need to catch up quickly. And I think the last 3 or 4 months have demonstrated some of the weaknesses in the system. So I think we need to be at the the queue when, as I suspect will happen at some point in the not too distant future, government will announce another wave of investment in broadband infrastructure. The second element for me, though, is about digitisation of all businesses. So if we've learned anything from being in a lockdown situation, it is that if you had a digital presence and you were thinking about how your business could operate virtually, you probably were able to cope with lockdown better than if you'd never thought about that. And right now, pretty much every single business needs to think about their digital presence and how they operate virtually, because if we, heaven forbid, went into second lockdown because of a spike either in Gloucestershire or in the UK, then those businesses that have thought about that and put those measures in place already will be in a much stronger position. So I think there's a role to get investment into the county, probably from government for broadband infrastructure. I think there's a second role, which is about how our growth hubs and others can support businesses to think about how they digitise their business more generally.
An adjunct to that, of course, is what you mentioned around resilience, and the growth hubs presumably will be talking to businesses about resilience, both to a second lockdown, but also, as you hinted, about this happening again. I mean, a pandemic like this is unfortunately unlikely to be a once in a millennium event. We need our businesses in Gloucestershire to be ready for the next one. There have been a number of comments coming in about City of Culture. You talked about the LEP support for that, and perhaps a little wavering amongst the City Council. The comments that are coming in suggest there'll be strong support for a City of Culture from the people who are involved tonight in this discussion. And is there anything the Honourable Company can do to help you? We have an Arts and Heritage group.
I think be as keen advocates of a City of Culture bid and process as you possibly can, and I think it's really important. City of Culture, it's really important for the whole of Gloucestershire, and I think it's easy, and we often fall into the trap in Gloucestershire of saying, well, if it's Gloucester, it's not the rest of the county, then is it really? Or if it's Cheltenham, it's not the rest of the county. The reality of a City of Culture bid would be that it would have an enormous impact on the whole of Gloucestershire, because Gloucester City in its own right couldn't deliver a City of Culture programme in the same way that other cities of culture have. So it will have to spread out around across the whole of the county, and Gloucester City are very committed to that and recognise the benefits of doing that. I think it's really important, because if we genuinely recognise our demographics are a challenge and we need to attract more younger people, then our cultural offer needs to be one that will attract younger people. We've got to convince people that currently live in Bristol that actually we've got a nice, diverse cultural offer that can compete with Bristol's in Gloucestershire. And we've got some great cultural assets, but lots of them play to a certain demographic, and rightly so, because that's the market. If we're going to change the demographic, that can't be just about the jobs or the houses. It has to be about the cultural offer as well. And I think that's why City of Culture is so important, because there's a genuine opportunity to build on the work that the Gloucester Culture team have done over the last 2 or 3 years to present a different cultural offering in Gloucester City that permeates across the county, that will attract different people into Gloucestershire. And that's really important for us if our businesses can survive.
And you could argue too that with the cultural industries under such pressure now from COVID, they will in Gloucestershire need all the help they can get to recover, and the bid would be part of that.
Absolutely.
Getting a few comments about transportation, comments about the desirability of sustainable rural transport, increased railway provision, what's happening to the air balloon. Do you want to expand a little bit on your thoughts on transportation in the county, particularly rural transportation?
So I think, well, we could spend all night talking about transportation. We could spend all night talking about the air balloon, probably, couldn't we? And just to box that one off, where we are on the air balloon is there's still a commitment for it to go ahead. It's been delayed. It's been delayed for a couple of reasons, but I think it's a 9-month delay as opposed to anything longer than that. So I still think we're closer now to the air balloon improvements being done than we've ever been, certainly in my lifetime in Gloucestershire. I think the challenge we have, I think there's a challenge for anywhere like Gloucestershire, which is that lots of policy around transport is written up in London, and if you live, work, have your social life in London, then you've got a fantastic transport system which gets you around the city of London and the outskirts like no other, because of the volume of population. Our challenge in Gloucestershire is very different, and it is in much of the UK. I think we need a proper mass transit system that links up Gloucester and Cheltenham, the outskirts of Gloucester and Cheltenham, that people want to use because it's better than getting into their cars. I think that will alleviate some of the pain of getting into Gloucester and Cheltenham from the more rural areas, but it's not going to be the only solution. We also need to look at how technology can provide a solution in the rural areas. So a modern version of a dial-a-ride service based on apps and using sustainable transport as opposed to smelly old diesel minibuses has to be part of the solution so that we can get people around. We know when we did our youth survey, the thing that always comes top of the list for young people is transport. They can't get to work, they can't get to education, they can't go and see their mates and go out and enjoy the things that they would like to in Gloucestershire. So we've got to demonstrate that Gloucestershire can be the place where you can trial some of those new systems for rural transport and rural connectivity, and that you can match it up with a strong urban core of good public transport.
Yeah, thank you, David. You mentioned young people there and the need to meet their various needs and aspirations if we're to attract them to the county. There's a question come in about the support for training and apprenticeships that the government offered today, and how can Gloucestershire key into that? Because you've mentioned how important it is to get young people in and to train them in the industries that we want to major on within the county. Can you talk some more about how Gloucestershire can make use of these initiatives from government?
Well, so what we've done, and I think done very well with our partners in the growth hubs across the county, is get that information out to businesses, because the key driver of getting young people into either traineeships or apprenticeships will be businesses being available, that there is that being aware that there is that support available for them. So that the £1,000 grant if you take on a traineeship, the £2,000 grant if you take on an apprenticeship. And so we'll be continuing to make businesses aware that those opportunities are available. We were having a discussion just before the session started, Chris. I think the question that we don't know the answer to is, what's the appetite amongst businesses at the moment for taking young people on at all, or taking new employees on at all? And we know there are some industries who are still desperate for people, particularly in digitech and cyber, but we know that there will be other industries who will really struggle to take people on right now. And I think it's really difficult to make the judgment about whether a measure like that will work, because we're in a completely unique situation. It's not like the last recession or the one before that or any other previous recession, because it's a health crisis based recession, which we've never known before. So what we'll do for our part is we'll keep informing businesses that those opportunities are there. Our Growth Hub service will keep coaching and working with any business that wants to work with them in the county to promote the support that's available from government. And we'll be working with the education providers and our schools as well to raise awareness. We had the announcement last week that we've now got a Gloucestershire Careers Hub from the Careers Enterprise Company, which will be launched in the autumn. Couldn't be better timing, really, for us as the LEP to have more support available to work with young people in schools, to give them really good guidance and advice on where their career path should go. So that's an added bonus, which is really timely.
Well, that's very positive. And just before we leave young people and their importance to the county in the future, just pass on a comment that I've seen just now from Nicola de Jong, who's chair of the University of Gloucestershire, in response to your challenge that the three higher education institutions should work together. She says she's very, very happy to do that. Your challenge back presumably is, okay, let's do that. You lead the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really recognising that that there's not a huge amount of competition directly between, or there shouldn't be. Doesn't need to be a huge amount of competition directly between our three universities, and so there must be an opportunity in how we can, how we as the LEP can work with those three institutions to promote the county as a place to come for higher education.
I think it's got to be a symbiotic relationship, because the universities themselves, of course, all universities, like all businesses, are under huge pressure at the moment as a result of COVID. There are real financial penalties associated with dealing with this pandemic and the effects of it. So it's going to be symbiotic, I think, between the LEP, the county, and the institutions. Let's change tack. I've got a question here, and I'll read it. This is a very exciting and proactive vision. But one, is there anything within the strategy? Is there a place within the strategy for nature recovery? And second, is it planning that has safeguarding the beauty of the area and providing the basis for tourism? So government's agenda for weakening planning doesn't please everyone. In other words, this tension between nature, the preservation of what's special about Gloucestershire in the forest and in the Cotswolds in particular, and planning.
Yeah, and that's always that's always a tension, isn't it? We've worked really closely with the local nature partnership. So I sit on the board of the local nature partnership, and we've worked really closely with them to look at, and in fact we've committed some funding to look at how we can measure the value of green infrastructure in Gloucestershire, so that we can make sure that we understand that it does have a value. And again, in our youth survey, one thing that came through really strongly alongside climate change was how much young people value the countryside and the natural environment in Gloucestershire. So we need to make sure that we understand what the value of that natural capital is. I think I don't necessarily think it's planning that's protected much of the countryside. It's certainly not protected much of the bits of the countryside that we would want to protect. I think planning at times has got in the way of a very sensible development, which could have improved the natural capital in Gloucestershire. And I would also say, if you look at the government, what the government's intentions are, it is far more about changing use of existing buildings than it is about enabling large-scale development, certainly in a county like Gloucestershire. But I'd pick on one example, and again, I was talking to someone about this earlier today. In love him or hate him, in Dale Vince, we've got someone who has a vision to develop the UK's only genuinely carbon neutral business park, and 4,000 jobs that go with that on the side of the M5, on a piece of land at the moment which is very poor quality agriculture land, because it's on the side of a motorway, and we've got a planning system which fights against that kind of development on the basis of it's going to create problems, rather than seeing it as an opportunity. And certainly the work that we've done in the last 5 years with the local nature partnership and with Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust has been to take a much more positive approach. So to work with developers to put better quality green infrastructure into their developments, as opposed to simply opposing every development that comes along. And the simple fact is, we've got to build more houses in Gloucestershire, because otherwise we're already not building enough, and if we carry on at the current rate, we won't have enough houses for people, and we definitely won't be able to attract more younger people into the county. And the final thing I'd say on this, my very favourite fact ever, is that according to Ordnance Survey, if you look at Gloucestershire, if we committed to never building on more than 5% of the county, we could build 3 times as many buildings as we've currently got, because there's only buildings at the moment in Gloucestershire on about 1.5% of the land that we have in Gloucestershire. So when we talk about there's development everywhere and there's no space and there's no green space, it's simply not true. The vast majority of Gloucestershire right now, in fact the vast majority of the UK, doesn't have any building or development on it. So there is lots of opportunity to do good quality green sympathetic development in Gloucestershire that meets some of our future needs.
Thank you, David. We've talked about areas of the economy that are under particular threat or stress, the cultural industries, tourism, because retail is also under threat, and I wonder whether the local industrial strategy has any comment or commentary on retail, and perhaps particularly high streets, what's happening on the high streets at the moment. Is there any part of the vision that deals with retail, given that in a normal society it's part of the attractiveness of an area?
I think you're absolutely right. It's retail and high streets are the things that we recognise about our places, the things that we either love or loathe about the places in which we live or visit, and so the high street offer and the retail offer will continue to be really important. I think we've seen in the headlines over the last couple of weeks, there is a huge challenge in retail. There's a huge challenge in the fact that the country was locked up for the best part of 3 months, and therefore people couldn't get to the shops other than the supermarkets. Well, shops weren't open anyway because they weren't allowed to be. But there's a real challenge in making sure that we have vibrant high streets that people want to visit. Part of that is about recognising that we don't purchase things in the same way as we did 20 or 30 years ago. And so the increase in online sales is not something we're going to be able to reverse in Gloucestershire and change, and perhaps isn't something we would want to reverse and change. We've got to make sure, therefore, that our high street destinations, so whether it's Gloucester City or Cheltenham, or it's our market towns or villages, are providing services that make people want to go to them for an experience rather than necessarily just a shop. And part of that is tied up in some of the work that Diane Savoury, the chair of the LEP, is doing with the Future High Streets Forum at a national level, and with the Retail Sector Council, to look at what is the high street offer that gets people there, and how do you match up our desire to buy things online and to take a more digital approach to our lives as consumers with the need to have vibrant high streets. You've got to get those two things working really seamlessly together. So the physical shop and the digital offer have got to work really well together. And there's some very good examples of businesses, retailers that are doing that. And there's lots of very bad examples of retailers who aren't doing that and have really suffered over the last few years. But retail and high streets absolutely has to be part of our strategy, because it is part of identifying what our places are.
Are you confident that the sort of advice that retailers need is getting through to them? I mean, are the growth hubs fully briefed on this because independent traders are often the most attractive part of a high street. The je ne sais quoi of walking through Cheltenham, for example, is the independent traders in part.
Yeah, I think the really good example for me, not just because it's just down the road from where I live, but and we've made an investment as the LEP in what was the Merrywalk Centre, now Five Valleys Shopping Centre, is the work that they've done. So they looked at the demographic around Stroud and worked out it was worth them investing 20 to 25 million pounds in that shopping centre, but also they looked at the shopping habits around in the surrounding areas. So they've just put in place a sort of borough market style market with lots of small independent, mainly food providers coming into that market. I think the first two have opened, one of which is a fruit and veg stall, the other is a Thai food takeaway offer. So they've recognised that buying habits are changing. They're looking to set up a delivery service for the whole of Stroud, so to compete, not directly, but to compete in some way with the supermarket delivery services, where if you're an independent retailer in Stroud, you can take your goods into their distribution point in Five Valleys Shopping Centre, and they'll distribute those goods around the district, certainly in the first instance, so that some of the small independent retailers can get into digitalising and offering their goods online, whereas perhaps if they were doing it on their own, they might struggle with the costs and certainly the logistics of delivery.
Good. Thank you, David. Question here about, essentially it's about influence and lobbying power and connectivity with central government, recognising that you can have all the strategies in the world, but if you don't have the funding, then you're not going to get very far. Could you tell us a little bit about your perspective on how how Gloucestershire can get its message over to central government. You mentioned Western Gateway, which will help in part. Do you think we are in a good position to lobby to get the monies we need for our strategy?
I think we're in the most positive position we've ever been in. Certainly in my nearly 12 years in this role, and my 7 years prior to that, I think it was at the University of Gloucestershire. And part of that is, as we approached a potential no-deal Brexit, government recognised that the only place that they could get good independent views of how businesses were feeling were local enterprise partnerships. And so we did a huge amount of work to look at what the impact of no-deal Brexit might be on businesses in Gloucestershire and to advise government on that. And then as we moved into the COVID crisis, that work switched into what's the impact of COVID on businesses in Gloucestershire and what are the interventions that government might need to make which would aid them. And so I would say in the last 3 months, we've had more interaction with secretaries of state and ministers of state than we've had for a considerable time. And our voice is being heard by those individuals at a national level. So Diane, again, sits on the National Economic Recovery Task Group, which is 2 LEP chairs, 5 or 6 of the elected mayors from across the country, and some representatives from local government associations. So as LEPs, our voice is being heard, and our voice is being heard because we can provide that rich data about what the impact is on local economies, and therefore what the impact will be on the UK PLC of events like COVID. So we'll keep doing the work we're doing. We now have regular meetings with our MPs as well. We've been having those for some years now, but we'll keep fighting for Gloucestershire and waving the flag for the county. And I think at government level, probably now more than at any time, they recognise the strength that we collectively as local enterprise partnerships can offer, and certainly we shout very loudly amongst the LEPs in terms of what our challenges and opportunities are for Gloucestershire. And
the Western Gateway?
I think Western Gateway for us is another route into that influence. We were on a leaders call with Western Gateway earlier this afternoon. And for us, that's about a focus on what are those big projects that can have an impact across the Western Gateway geography that perhaps wouldn't get as much airtime with government, certainly if they were taken up by one partner. So for us, the really obvious one is Cyber Central and the Cyber Park, and that connects really well into developments that are going on in Bristol at the moment, but also in South Wales as well, and into a lot of the higher education provision that happens to be across the Western Gateway area. That's just one example. So Western Gateway for us is a good way of having more people fighting for us because we're supporting and working with them as well.
Talking there about funding and influence on a county-wide basis, focusing down a little bit on individual companies. It's a comment from Ruth Dooley, something we've raised before about a business angel network in the county, and how that would be a real asset, and how might one promote that or stimulate that, and in that context, is there anything again the Honourable Company could do to help?
Yes, definitely. I had a brief conversation with Ruth about this over email a couple of weeks ago now. I think there is a real opportunity around angel investment network. We at one stage had the Southwest Angel Investment Network, but that sort of died a death some years ago. I'm not entirely sure why it disappeared, but I think there is a real opportunity, given the makeup of Gloucestershire and some of the high net worth individuals that we know we have in the county who would be interested in getting involved. I think there is an opportunity to set something up that could support startup and growing businesses in the county, and any help that Honourable Company could offer in doing that would be gratefully received.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that the business group can think on and see what we might be able to do to help. Questions keep coming back to, as you've done in the past, David, this question of attracting young people into the county. Bishop Rachel has commented that we've talked a lot about this, and indeed Bishop Rachel talked to us at the Honourable Company about it a couple of years ago. In the context of City of Culture, are we confident that a bid for City of Culture would be inclusive and would meet the needs across the demographics, rather than just having Beethoven's Fifth over and over again? Would there be things that would have a wider appeal, do you think? How can we ensure that?
I think they have to. I think that I'd be deeply depressed if Beethoven's Fifth appeared anywhere in the City of Culture bid, because I think that would lose the purpose. The Cheltenham festivals, albeit they're going through a tough time at the moment because of COVID, serve that particular demographic very, very well, and the music festival serves that demographic very well. It would be a real pity if we didn't learn from festivals like Strike a Light that happen in Gloucester, and some of the other more challenging festivals that probably don't appeal to me very much as an individual, and probably don't appeal to very many people on this call very much as individuals, but are really important in attracting a different, more inclusive demographic. We've got such rich diversity in the county, and particularly in Gloucester City, and there's been a historical difficulty with engaging that diversity and using it in the right way to present a different image of Gloucester and of the county. And I think a City of Culture bid absolutely has to be at the edges of normality. So it has to be pushing the boundaries in terms of the kind of offer that we want to see happening in a City of Culture year for Gloucester and for the county. And therefore that has to be engaging of the diversity that we have in Gloucestershire and beyond that. So yeah, as I say, Beethoven's Fifth absolutely, for me, wouldn't be on the agenda anywhere. I might not find lots of the things that are offered very attractive. I might find some of them very attractive, but that's the whole point. We should be putting things on in a City of Culture, a Year of Culture proposal that would attract a different demographic into the county and would engage people that aren't normally engaged, that already live here.
Yeah. And as Bishop Rachel comments, there could well be a role for the educational institutions, be they primary, secondary or tertiary, in setting the agenda for a City of Culture bid that will be attractive to a younger audience. Absolutely.
And I would say I think the Cathedral has done a fantastic job over the last n number of years in bringing things into the Cathedral that ordinarily would feel challenging to put in a cathedral setting. So I think we've already got an example operating right in the centre of Gloucester that is pushing the boundaries in terms of what you would expect from a cathedral offer. So there's no reason why we can't push the boundaries further in the city and in the county as well, I don't think.
Well, David, I've got other questions here, but I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. But just to finish, there's a comment here about how great it is to hear and to have all these ideas and initiatives. But how can we help you tell this story of direction of travel to the man or woman? Mark Hurrell, who's put this comment in, quotes the man on the Clapham omnibus. Well, the Clapham omnibus may be a little bit too far away for us, but whatever the Gloucester and Cheltenham equivalent of the Clapham omnibus is, how do we get this message out?
I think that's becoming more and more of a challenge. Mark's former employer in Radio Gloucestershire still do a great job of selling the story and selling the county, but of course we've seen announcements about cuts in BBC regions being made in the last week or so. We've got local media, which is really struggling, and again we've seen announcements of over 500 jobs going in Reach PLC, which runs as the Citizen and Echo as part of its portfolio. So there is a lack of local media. Part of the lack of local media is that that's not how people are consuming news. So we have a very heavy presence on Facebook and on Twitter as an organisation. We have a not quite so heavy presence on Instagram, but if, like me, you've got teenage daughters, you'll know that Instagram is much trendier and cooler than Twitter or Facebook. So we have to get much better. We have to get much better as an organisation. I think we as a county have to get much better at thinking about how we engage different people, and particularly how we engage more young people, because it's tough. When we did our young person survey ahead of the local industrial strategy, we got to over 5,000 young people, and we did it because we worked with Young Gloucestershire, because we knew that they were people who were much closer to a diverse group of young people in Gloucestershire than we would ever be as the LEP. So we have to get more savvy as well about using partners and working with people to make sure that they're getting the messages and they're understanding the ambition, and that they're challenging the ambition as well when they should be.
David, thank you very much indeed. That's been an interesting tour around the issue. We're very grateful to you for your time. There are topics we haven't touched on, like you mentioned the green economy and the opportunities that offers for us, the opportunities of new work practices, which I think are relevant to the county, because people will find the county an attractive place to live, and in their life-work balance, they'll perhaps make it a higher priority than they may have done in the past. So there are real opportunities for Gloucestershire. But it does sound as if the LEP, thank you, is really thinking through the implications of COVID for the local industrial strategy, and that's good to hear. And from the perspective of the Honourable Company, there's a couple of things in our discussion today for us to pick up to see how we can help you. But rest assured that the Honourable Company is more than willing to help you work for Gloucestershire in the future, and we'll hopefully continue this conversation and get updates on a regular basis. So David, thank you for your time again, and thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you found it interesting. I've found it fascinating. Thank you to Phil for doing the technology. We'll organise more of these, I hope. We'll keep them to an hour as we've done tonight, because that's a good time for which we can all concentrate through. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you again to David. Good night.
Thank you.